Language learning theories, cognitive theory and discourse theory. The dictionary meaning of the word cognition is the process of gaining knowledge through experience and the senses. Cognitive psychology, which deals with such processes as thought, understanding, perception of information, etc., has influenced greatly the whole domain of learning theories and especially the theories of language learning. There are many theories of language learning, some of which have been influenced by cognitive psychology, and this may be discussed under the ambit of cognitive theory of language learning. As has been said, among many other theories of language learning, one important theory is discourse theory of language learning, which has its roots in linguistic and educational theories. Today's discussion will touch these two theories, cognitive theory and discourse theory of language learning, keeping in mind there are many other theories of language learning which also demand equal attention and importance. Cognitivists are interested in the construction of L2 grammars, but not exclusively so. In fact, they are just as interested in performance, if not more so. For example, recent work from cognitive psycholinguists has investigated the development of fluency in learners and how learners improve access to their linguistic system with time and practice. Learning strategies have also been focused of much attention. From this point of view, the learner is seen as operating a complex processing system which deals with linguistic information in similar ways to other kinds of information. It would be wrong to suggest, however, that cognitivists are only interested in performance and not in competence. The main difference between linguistic approaches and cognitive approaches to language learning is that whereas the former believe human beings to be endowed with a language-specific module in the mind, the latter do not believe that language is separate from other aspects of cognition. The human mind is geared to the processing of all kinds of information being understood in a broad sense, and linguistic information is just one type and highly complex. The dichotomy is, of course, somewhat caricatural, and you find researchers who believe that there is a language-specific module for first language acquisition, but that the learning of second languages is different and relies on general cognitive mechanisms. You also find that even for L1 acquisition, some researchers believe that some aspects of language acquisition are innate and other aspects not. In this lecture, we will first investigate how cognitivists account for the learning of language by reviewing three approaches: the perceptual saliency approach, connectionism, and the information processing approach. The perceptual saliency approach. This approach is largely based on the work of John Slovin in the 1970s and 1980s, culminating with the publication of a two-volume cross-linguistic study of child language development in 1985. He argues that the similarity in linguistic development across children and across languages is due to the fact that human beings are programmed to perceive and organize information in certain ways. It is this perceptual saliency which drives the learning process rather than an innate language-specific module. He has devised, added to, and refined over the years a number of operating principles which guide children in their processing of the linguistic strings they encounter. His operating principles have been adapted to second language learning by Anderson. Operating principles and first language acquisition. Slovin's operating principles are based on the claim that certain linguistic forms are more accessible or more salient to the child than others. These are different from linguistic universals in that they are cognitive in nature and characterize the way in which children perceive their environment and try to make sense of it and organize it. Operating principle A. Pay attention to the end of words. Operating principle B. There are linguistic elements which encode relations between words. Operating principle C. Avoid exceptions. Operating principle D. Underlying semantic relations should be marked overtly and clearly. Operating principle E. The use of grammatical markers should make semantic sense. Operating principle and second language acquisition. In second language acquisition, operating principles have been investigated mainly by Anderson. Anderson's principles are based on Slovenes but are then adapted to the learning of second languages. The one-to-one principle. An interlanguage system should be constructed in such a way that an intended underlying meaning is expressed with one clear invariant surface form or construction. Connectionism or parallel distributed processing models. The connectionist, previously known as associationist, approach to learning has been around for some time, but it is only recently that advances in computer technology have given it a new breath of life. The 1980s and 1990s have witnessed an impressive wealth of studies adopting a connectionist framework to the study of memory and learning. Very recently, connectionism has been applied to L2 learning. Connectionism or parallel distributed processing (PDP) likens the brain to a computer consists of neural networks, complex clusters of links between information nodes. These links or connections become strengthened or weakened through activation or non-activation respectively. Learning in this view occurs on the basis of associative processes rather than the construction of abstract rules. In other words, the human mind predisposed to look for associations between elements and create links between them. This link becomes stronger as these associations keep recurring, and they also become part of larger networks as connections between elements become more numerous. When applied to the learning of language, connectionism claims that learners are sensitive to regularities in a language input, that is, the regular co-occurrence of particular language forms, and extract probabilistic patterns on the basis of regularities. Learning occurs as these patterns become strengthened by repeated activation. The diagram below gives a pictorial representation of this model of language learning. Learning in this view is thought to take place as the strength of given interconnections between nodes increases as the associative patterns are repeated over time. What is important to remember from this type of account is that the learner does not extract rules and then apply them. In this case, the fact that gender assignment in French is not random but obeys certain orthographic and phonetic rules, but merely registers associative patterns which become strengthened with use. McLaughlin's information processing model. The main characteristic of such an approach can be summarized as follows. 1. Humans are viewed as autonomous and active. 2. The mind is a general purpose symbol processing system. 3. Complex behavior is composed of simpler processes. These processes are modular. 4. Component processes can be isolated and studied independently of other processes. 5. Processes take time, therefore predictions about reaction time can be made. 6. The mind is limited capacity processor. When applied to second language learning, this approach can be summarized as follows. Within this framework, second language learning is viewed as the acquisition of a complex cognitive skill. To learn a second language is to learn a skill because various aspects of the task must be practiced and integrated into fluent performance. This requires the automatization of component subskills. Learning is a cognitive process because it is thought to involve internal representations that regulate and guide performance. As performance improves, there is constant restructuring as learners simplify, unify, and gain increasing control over their internal representations. These two notions, automatization and restructuring, are central to cognitive theory. Applied to second language learning, such a model works as follows. 1. Learners first resort to control processing in the L2. This control processing involves the temporary activation of a selection of information nodes in the memory. In a new configuration, such processing requires a lot of attentional control on the part of the subject and is constrained by the limitations of the short-term memory STM. 2. Through repeated activation, sequences first produced by controlled processing become automatic. Automatized sequences are stored as units in the long-term memory LTM, which means that they can be made available very rapidly whenever the situation requires it, with minimal attentional control on the part of the subject. As a result, automatic process can work in parallel, activating clusters of complex cognitive skills simultaneously. However, once acquired, such automatized skills are difficult to delete or modify. 3. Learning in this view is seen as a movement from control to automatic processing via practice, that is, repeated activation. When this shift occurs, control processes are free to deal with higher level of processing, that is, to the integration of more complex skill clusters, thus explaining the incremental, step-by-step nature of learning. It is necessary for simple sub-skills and routines to become automatic before more complex ones can be taught. 4. This continuing movement from control to automatic processing results in a constant restructuring of the linguistic system of the L2 learner. This phenomenon may account for the sum of the variability characteristic of learner language. Restructuring destabilizes some structures in the interlanguage, which seem to have been previously acquired, and hence leads to the temporary reappearance of L2 errors. This account is also especially convincing in its explanation of the vexed issue of fossilization, which is so well documented in second language acquisition studies. Fossilization refers to the fact that L2 learners, unlike L1 learners, sometimes seem unable to get rid of non-native-like structures in their L2 in spite of abundant linguistic input over many years. Fossilization in this model would arise as a result of a control process becoming automatic before it is native-like. As we have seen, automatic processes are difficult to modify as they are outside the attentional control of the subject, thus they are likely to remain in the learner's interlanguage, giving rise to a stable but erroneous construction. Discourse theory. Discourse theories of language acquisition follows from a theory of language use in which communication is treated as a matrix of linguistic knowledge. Language development should be considered in terms of how the learner discovers the meaning potential of language by participating in communication. Halliday held such views on first language acquisition. The structure of language is itself a reflection of the function it serves. It can be learned through learning to communicate. According to Cherry, though communicating with other people, children accomplish actions in the world and develop the rules of language structure and use. It is because the L2 learner is similarly motivated to accomplish actions, at least in informal second language acquisition, that a parallel can be drawn between first and second language acquisition. In second language acquisition, this view of how development takes place has become known as the discourse theory. The discourse theory proposed by Hatch can be outlined as the following. 1. SLA follows a natural route in syntactical development. 2. Native speakers adjust their speech in order to negotiate meaning with non-native speakers. 3. The conversational strategies used to negotiate meaning and the resulting adjusted input influence the rate and route of second language acquisition in a number of ways. A. The learner learns the grammar of the L2 in the same order as the frequency order of the various features in the input. B. The learner acquires commonly occurring formulas and then later analyzed this into their component parts. C. The learner is helped to construct sentences vertically. Vertical structures are the precursors of horizontal structures. 4. Thus, the natural route is a result of learning how to hold conversation. Though it is agreed upon that discourse through social interaction may give the learner the best data to work with, Discourse theory does not pay any attention to how the brain deals with this data. This means it completely overlooks the cognitive part, which, according to other researchers, plays an important role and cannot be neglected at all. Materials for this lecture have been drawn freely from the book Second Language Acquisition by Robert Ellis, Oxford University Publication.